One of two big winners in our latest giveaway, as we have two prize bundles that have to be won. There's two lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very, very good evening to you. It's 7 p.m. and I'm Martin Daubney here on GB News. It's Monday the 3rd of March and you're watching GB News Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. On tonight's show, Shadow Foreign Secretary accuses Nigel Farage of being like Jeremy Corbyn when it comes to the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Is this a fair assessment or gratuitous point scoring? And today marks 40 years since the miners' strike that rocked Great Britain and tested Margaret Thatcher's premiership commenced 4 decades on. What's been the lasting legacy of this historic event in British politics? And another historic boozer closes, this one over 300 years old, joining an average of now 6 pubs per week, calling last orders in 2024. What's next for the great British boozer? And just in a few moments' time, where Donald Trump will make a huge announcement on investment at the White House. We'll bring you that live as it happens, and that could be Donald Trump pulling the plug on funds over Ukraine over a massive, massive war of words since that meltdown in DC in the White House on Friday evening. But first, here's your news headlines, and it's Sam Francis.
Martin, thank you very much, and good evening to you. Fast approaching 2 minutes past 7. The top story tonight, Sir Keir Starmer has told MPs that Russian President Vladimir Putin feasts on division and that Ukraine's future is vital to UK national security. He says Russia is a menace in British waters and skies, has carried out cyber attacks on the National Health Service and even conducted assassination attacks in our streets. The Prime Minister insists Britain will now lead from the front in securing peace for Ukraine after a week of talks with Volodymyr Zelensky, European leaders and US President Donald Trump. Well, Dame Priti Patel spoke to our political editor Christopher Hope earlier today, and she insists it's vital that Britain plays a leading role in achieving that peace.
This matters to us as a country. It matters to our own security here domestically. I can't emphasise that enough. Look at who the aggressor is in this conflict. It's Russia. It's the same Russia that committed poisonings in our own country not that long ago. You remember Salisbury? We had politicians in that very chamber that I've sat in this afternoon who would not even acknowledge Russian influence.
Well, it comes after Zelensky's heated Oval Office exchange with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And tonight, Donald Trump has again criticised the Ukrainian president, calling his recent comments on the war the worst statement that could have been made. It follows Zelensky saying the conflict with Russia is still very, very far away from ending. In a new statement tonight, Zelensky says Ukraine is counting on American support, though, describing peace as the country's highest priority. He says talks with partners are ongoing, with more steps to come soon. At least 2 people have died and several others are seriously injured after a car drove into crowds in the German city of Mannheim. The vehicle rammed pedestrians in a busy square just after midday today, with police describing it as a life-threatening situation. The driver, a 40-year-old man, has been arrested, but authorities haven't ruled out the possibility of more suspects being involved. Mannheim's hospital is now on high alert. 8 trauma teams there are treating the injured, and it comes as security was already stepped up across Germany for the carnival season amid warnings of possible attacks. The Pope has suffered 2 episodes of acute respiratory failure as the Vatican warns he's not out of danger. The 88-year-old's health took a turn this afternoon after being in hospital since mid-February with a lung infection. Doctors carried out 2 procedures to check his airways while he's now back on a ventilator. The Vatican says Pope Francis remains alert and cooperative, but his prognosis is still uncertain. Officials won't say if preparations are at this stage being made for him to return home. An inquiry into the deadliest channel crossing in history has heard that despite multiple distress calls, no rescue came for those on board. At least 27 people died when an inflatable boat capsized in November of 2021, including women and children. The first distress call was made by a 16-year-old boy on board who was told help is on the way. But search crews mistakenly recorded another boat as the vessel in trouble. A cold water expert says most victims likely died over a long period from hypothermia. The investigation will now examine whether lives could have been saved. And the ceasefire in Gaza is on the brink of collapse, with Israel halting humanitarian aid until Hamas accepts a new deal. Israel says the proposal, backed by the US, would extend the truce by 50 days, covering Ramadan and Passover, in exchange for the release of half of the remaining hostages. Hamas, though, has denounced the move as an attempt to avoid negotiations, as pressure is mounting from Arab states and the UN to resume aid in the region. Protests in Israel, though, have intensified, with growing calls to bring home all hostages. And both sides are now preparing to resume fighting while weighing their options for peace. Those are the latest headlines. A full roundup on all the top stories at 8 o'clock. Now, though, back to Westminster and Martin.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, the war of words escalates. Donald Trump has taken aim at Zelensky after the Ukrainian leader warns that peace is very, very far away. And the president blasted Zelensky, calling his statement on Truth Social a short while ago the worst that could have been made, and warning that America will not put up with it for much longer. Now, Zelensky, in a meeting with European leaders, received a reiteration of support, while Trump accuses him of stalling peace efforts to keep US support flowing. In just a moment's time, Donald Trump is about to make an announcement in front of the world's media at the White House. What do you think is on the table? Could it be a huge announcement about pulling the plug on Ukrainian aid, or could it be something more domestic, announcing a lot of money going into the semiconductor industry in the United States? Well, join me for a reaction. It's Republican commentator and the columnist, Lee Cohen. Lee, welcome to the show. So the war of words is escalating. An astonishing scene on Friday evening at the White House when basically Zelensky left empty-handed. The war of words has continued. It's just revved up now. Trump said this guy does not want peace and we won't put up with it for much longer, saying that they cannot do the job without the United States of America. Now, there's been a lot of talk for a long time from America about pulling the plug on NATO money, pulling the plug perhaps on $500 million that Joe Biden pledged to Ukraine in the final days of his presidency. Do you think there's going to be a satisfactory solution anytime soon where Donald Trump is going to be happy with Zelensky? He still seems very, very bruised by that encounter in the White House on Friday.
Well, good evening, Martin, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. One thing is very clear. Trump sees the world as it is rather than as others think it ought to be. He deals in power and money rather than mere words. And it is clear that he was very disenchanted with what things rolled out, with the sequence of events that rolled out in the White House. So I'm very eager to hear this statement that's going to unroll, as you say, shortly. What could he do? I suspect he indeed could double down on his pledge to roll back support. And I think that would be completely in character. And I think it would dovetail with Trump's belief in putting his own nation first, in preserving the taxpayers' money, and in withholding further aid for clearly a foreign leader who is cocky and who got aggressive with him and who was disrespectful and perhaps even ungrateful.
Lee, can I ask you about the reaction from the American public? We seem stuck in a kind of media bubble in the United Kingdom, perhaps aside from GB News, where there seems to be unanimous, almost evangelical support for Volodymyr Zelensky. But is Donald Trump talking a lot of common sense in as far as what the American taxpayer is saying? Billions and billions and billions of dollars going to what seems to be for a forever war, and Zelensky talking tough and walking away empty-handed from Washington. What are the American people saying about their appetite for continuing funding the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think it depends, Martin, on whom you consult. Certainly, the New York Times and company are with most of Europe in berating Donald Trump and treating him as the bully. But there are a lot of us that don't feel that way. There are a lot of us that feel that he is living up to his well-known pledge to put nation first. And why shouldn't he put nation first? Of course, I believe that Britain should put Britain first and France should put France first. Americans been carrying too much of this load, and Europe is scrambling while Trump stands firm on forcing a ceasefire. He's all about peace occurring, stopping the bloodshed, but also doing so within the context of what's best for the American people. And I think that's the best possible approach to this.
OK, Lee Cohen, thank you very, very much for joining us. And just to remind people joining us on the show now, Donald Trump is due to speak imminently from the White House. And that topic could be on pulling the plug on investment in Ukraine. It could be about investments going to USA. But there's absolutely a war of words broken out on social media after that extraordinary war of words in person in the White House on Friday. Now, let's get to my panel. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the former spokesman for Reform UK, Gawain Towler, and the Right Honourable Nigel Nelson, GB News' senior political commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Always an absolute pleasure. I'm going to start with you, Gawain, tonight, if I could. A lot of people saying, certainly GB News viewers today, saying they are getting fed up of pumping endless billions into Ukraine. I think about 85% of our viewers today want the money to end. Donald Trump is clearly running out of patience, and yet there seems to be a huge political narrative, the deification of Volodymyr Zelensky. Do you think we're reaching some kind of end game in all of this political pantomime?
No, I don't. I don't think we're reaching an end game by a long chalk. I think it's going to carry on just as the killing fields have been carrying on in Ukraine. What Mr. Cohen was saying just now is there's some truth in this. I mean, Trump sees the world, and he sees the world in power and money. And that's how it is. That's the reality. What we see is I'm seeing the sort of coordinated tweets from Luxembourg saying, we stand forward behind Ukraine. What are we looking at here? What do they stand with? The pea shooter? The question, I've got all this positivity. It's like a Me Too moment, and everybody tweeting, hashtag Ukraine lives, or Slava Ukraini. And great, I wish they would. And Putin's a ghastly dictator and shouldn't have invaded. But what can we actually do? If America does pull the plug, that's 50% of all the funding for Ukraine. And does Europe have the capacity to make up that shortfall? I don't believe it has. And all we will do is show our weakness rather than our strength. And that is, I think, much more scary.
Nigel Nelson, in the chamber today in Parliament, Sir Keir Starmer said Britain will lead from the front. Why? Why should we lead from the front? We can't even defend our own shores. We had record numbers arrive in small boats yesterday, a huge amount continuing today, and we're talking about deploying British troops. There seems to be no real public appetite to go down that route, and yet it seems we have a political class hell-bent on prolonging this war.
Well, we'll see. I mean, the reason he's leading from the front is that he's developed a relationship with President Trump, and along with Emmanuel Macron of France, that it's those two countries which would be in the forefront of talking to President Trump about any kind of deal. The question is whether there's a deal likely to be on the table or not.
Why should Britain lead from the front? We're nowhere near the geographical front. What about Germany? What about them coughing up more?
Well, I mean, Germany should cough up more. I mean, we're heading towards 3% of gross national income for defence. So should Germany. But look what history shows us. That in the 1930s we almost abdicated any responsibility then. We went in for appeasement. What then happened?
Why? Because we were not ready to fight.
That's right, absolutely right.
The appeasement of Chamberlain, he's been, I think, traduced by history, because he realised we could not stand up to Germany
right.
at that point.
Part of
and he was delaying in order to build up. We have one. Remember Stalin's comment about the Pope? How many divisions? Well, you asked about Europe. We've only got about 4 divisions.
Yeah. So
we just don't have the capacity, and it doesn't happen like that. Yeah. It will happen over. It'll take years.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that this is where we are in a very similar position to the 1930s, and it's no coincidence that the EU President Ursula von der Leyen is talking in the same kind of terms about
the woman that destroyed the German Navy, army,
about rearming Europe. So at the moment, that the kind of mood music is, what do we do if we haven't got America on side? If all goes well, we keep America on side. So that's why Keir Starmer is leading from the front in a desperate attempt to try and keep America with us.
Or is it actually a desperate attempt for relevance? Because let's face it, all of this pontificating, all of this chest-puffing by Macron and Starmer and the whole lot of Ursula von der Leyen, as you said, that they blatantly and nakedly want a European army. She pledged that the first time she spoke in 2019. People don't want a European army. We can't afford a European army. How on earth, when we're faced with a bill of £22 billion black hole we're continually told about, can we find endless billions for Ukraine?
Well, and when it comes to the money, there are a lot of those being paid for from different ways. Some of it comes from the foreign aid budget, some of it comes from an existing Ministry of Defence budget, and an awful lot of it is coming from the $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets in Europe. So using the proceeds from that funds the loan that we just gave
the best thing to do
to Ukraine
for our European allies and friends is to stop buying Russian gas, because they've actually given Russia more money than they have given Ukraine over the period of this war.
And maybe that's why Germany are absent from this new defence.
Which they pulled back on the gas. What they could always do, of course, rather than just freezing these Russian assets, they could actually take them.
But if they do
that would solve the problem.
We have a government, as we all are aware, that is a government of lawyers, and they look at international law. Seizing those assets, fine, they've frozen them, but they can't use them because that would be against international law.
They're using the proceeds from them,
but if you were suggesting taking the actual assets, what would happen? We'd be paying compensation to the Russians.
There would be a situation where if the whole thing breaks down, we would end up seizing those assets, so we would then get the money back.
OK, gentlemen, as discussed, we are still waiting for the imminent arrival of Donald Trump, who's going to speak at the White House. We're going to take a short break and return to that. And also, later in the show, Shadow Foreign Secretary accuses Nigel Farage of being like Jeremy Corbyn when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Is this a fair assessment or gratuitous and ridiculous point scoring? I'll be joined by Richard Tice. He joins me next in a moment.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
A new study has found that almost 8 in 10 of Gen Z Brits believe that the romantic poems of Shakespeare, Keats, Barrett Browning and the rest are outdated and irrelevant. Can we re-engage youngsters with such verse? Can the Gen Z audience become infatuated with love poetry? Joining me now is the Professor and Chair of English at the University of Virginia, Andrew Stauffer. Andrew, welcome to GB News. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Michael. Thank you for having me.
What is it that a poet does with language and in love, with language and with love, to express love better than any other way in which it can be expressed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it is, it's relying on language as being the primary way that we get in touch with our feelings, that, poetry is the language art par excellence. And so it's the assumption that the more we can use our words to talk about our feelings, the deeper, more pleasurable, more available those feelings actually are to us. And so in a certain way, reading poetry, not only we recognize our feelings, we even catch feelings from art, from poems, from songs, from stories. There's a way that even our own most personal relationships are structured by the culture that we have grown up in and that we've been immersed in. And so it really can be an aid, or at least a transformative experience to encounter language, to give yourself words for your own very private feelings that turns out have been felt by other people going all the way back to Sappho and Catullus and Horace and through Shakespeare and through the whole English tradition. So that can be galvanizing as well, really kind of eye-opening to know that you're not alone in your feelings.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Headliners on GB News, 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn are not seen as political bedfellows, to say the least. However, today the Conservatives have been comparing the two, some might say ludicrously. Now, the catalyst for this bizarre love marriage, as you may have guessed, is Nigel Farage's reaction to last week's row between Zelensky and Donald Trump, and the Reform leader describing Zelensky as rude and criticised the Ukrainian president for not wearing a suit. Well, the shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel today described the Labour leader as having history of equivocating over Russia's illegal war in Ukraine and compared Farage to the former Labour leader. So does she have a point? Well, I'm joined now in the studio by the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, along with my esteemed panel, Gawain Towler and Nigel Nelson. Richard, welcome to the studio.
What a ludicrous comparison. I mean, honestly, what does Priti... We like Priti, but she's taken leave of her senses, for heaven's sake. I mean, honestly.
I didn't even need to introduce you there before you...
It's just so ludicrous, so juvenile. I mean, the reality is that, as we've all said, Friday was uncomfortable, it was regrettable, far from plan A. But everyone needs to focus on the objective and the prize, and that is to get to a peace deal, as the Prime Minister said in the chamber today, a peace deal that has genuine, robust security guarantees. That's actually a win-win for everybody, and that must be the objective. And I just think, forget all the noise. Let's just work out, let's entrust the leaders. They've all got really difficult jobs to do. Zelensky, the pressure on him, unbelievable for any of us to imagine, frankly. President Trump's got pressure on him. He told his electorate that he would get a peace deal. So they've all got pressure. These negotiations should take place behind closed doors. There's a lot of cards on the table, including, as we heard in the chamber today, which I've been talking about for some time, the use of the Russian frozen assets. Not just the proceeds, but actually the capital assets themselves. in Western bank. This is $300 billion worth. Putin would be furious to lose that. So these are some of the things that need to be all on the table, but let people negotiate behind closed doors.
Thank you very much. Now, just to announce, we are expecting to cross to that press conference imminently at the White House. Donald Trump expected to speak. We've got some pictures there of the podium. That's the world-famous podium that Donald Trump will appear at any moment. Now, will this press conference be announced about the huge war of words between Zelensky and Trump? Earlier on, Donald Trump said the guy doesn't want peace and we won't put up with it for much longer. There are rumours earlier on today that potentially $500 million of aid pledged by Joe Biden in the last 3 days of his term might be pulled. It could be about inward investment in the semiconductor industry. We'll go to that when Donald Trump emerges. But back to you, Richard Tice, if I could. They seem to be attacking reform now at any opportunity. Is that a sign that they're concerned? But
Concerned, they're terrified. They're absolutely petrified. That's why both the old main guard parties that have broken Britain are attacking us, because they realise, oh, goodness me, Reform are leading in the polls. That means they must be doing something right, which is understanding the genuine concerns of the British people, who are all getting poorer month by month.
Nigel Nelson, let's bring you in now. Is there any merit in the idea that Jeremy Corbyn could be a doppelganger for Nigel Farage? I thought I'd heard I thought I'd heard the lot. This one even surprised me.
No, there isn't. So I don't understand what Priti Patel is talking about. It's a very strange comparison. There are two things that Richard just said that I really do agree with. You mentioned the $300 billion of frozen assets, the possibility of taking those assets, which is what we were talking about earlier. The other point, which I think is really important, is not about the blame for what happened on Friday, whether you would blame Zelensky or whether you blame Trump. That should have been held behind closed doors. That was the point that Richard made. This is not the way international diplomacy is conducted. You don't have a row in front of the world's press. So the whole thing felt like a deliberate ambush, probably not intended to be quite as gruesome as it turned out.
Do you think it was actually a deliberate ambush?
Yes.
Or actually, if you watch that entire press conference, as I did, well over an hour, the first 45 minutes, going to tell, were very, very convivial. But it got spiky later on.
They were convivial.
Zelensky pushed it too far.
They got within seconds of signing up to a security deal. I mean, that was basically agreed on in that press conference, and then there was the kickoff. So I don't think it was an ambush. I think it got out of hand. It reeled off, and you're right. These sort of things should not... A press conference is, once you've come to an agreement, then you tell people what it is, rather than do the negotiations. But Trump does things differently. He wants to be transparent with the American people. He's made that absolutely clear. And you've got to remember, Trump is more concerned about the threat of China and the fact that China and Russia are working together. He needs to pull and peel Russia off China in order to deal with the future. And so, therefore, he is making overtures to Russia to try and secure a peace. Anything else, anything other than a peace, anything other than a continuation of this war, just depletes resources, treasury. Now, that is interesting, the idea of the $300 billion being used as... I'm worried about the international law and the fact that we can find ourselves paying compensation for it. But being used as a card on the table, that's a great idea.
But the person who broke the international law was, of course, the aggressor, Putin. He's the one that's invaded. And when you do that, you have to realise... You've broken all the rules. Don't expect that your money's going to come back. I think we should be bolder and braver about finding the ways that the Prime Minister said was complicated. Well, let's get through the complications. We've got some very bright, smart people, because that's the way then that you can pay for the security guarantees, start to pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine, whilst also legitimate concerns of Western citizens, British citizens. How can we afford to keep paying all these costs when we're struggling ourselves? These are all very legitimate issues on the table.
Nigel Nelson, has Zelensky overcooked his goose? He could have walked away with a peace deal on Friday. He's walked away with nothing.
Well, no, I don't think he did, because the whole thing, this is what I'm talking about, the ambush, that quite clearly it was intended to needle him, whatever else was the purpose behind it. And little things like not wearing a suit. He doesn't wear a suit. He won't wear a suit until the end of the war. He's stated that. To actually make an issue out of that's bizarre, especially when you see Elon Musk turn up to a White House cabinet meeting in in a baseball cap and T-shirt. So there was no reason for that. That's what I think the whole thing was a deliberate ambush. Yes, there's a way back. We know that Donald Trump can change his mind with the wind. So the question is, and that's what Keir Starmer was trying to do in the House of Commons today, keep America on side, try and get this peace deal through, and we do need that American security guarantee.
OK, thank you, Nigel. Richard, we're still waiting for that press conference to come up at the White House. Sir Keir Starmer today seemed to intimate in Parliament there might be a vote on the notion of deploying British troops onto Ukrainian soil, peacekeeping, call it what you like, and also RAF in the air. Britain should lead the way. I've got to say, GB News viewers on the whole, not into that idea. 80% today of them were saying we should have no further part in this. We've sent £12.8 billion thus far, a further £1.6 billion. Our viewers are concerned about pensioners being very cold, about farmers losing their land. May I ask you, Mr. Tice, if you were to vote on deploying British troops to Ukraine, how do you think you'd go?
Well, I think actually if you get to a successful negotiation, in a sense, if you need overseas troops on the ground, I'm not sure you've got the right conclusion to a negotiation, because actually Ukraine's got many more troops than we have. What Ukraine needs is a guarantee that there is the overriding security blanket, whether it's technology, whether it's air cover, whether it's a dome shield, whether it's additional sanctions. Those are the things that I think actually, which is completely separate to troops on the ground.
Do you want to see British boys and girls in Ukraine?
No, I don't think anybody wants to see our troops overseas in some form of demilitarised zone.
Starmer does.
Well,
Kemi Badenoch does. They both not got along together.
I think you've got to keep all things on the table. The reality is that we've got to come up with the guarantees that are robust. And I do think it is quite interesting that if you get to a deal on minerals, which is obviously what President Trump is trying to get towards, that actually in itself comes with a quite significant implicit guarantee of American safety, of their own interests and their own people on the ground. These are all things in the mix on the ground. So I think, in a sense, don't prejudge it. That is clearly
British
the point.
boots on the ground, yes or no? How would you vote?
Don't prejudge it. No, I'm not going to answer that question. Because,
why not?
Because the best peace deal is where actually no overseas nations needs any boots on the ground. I'm not sure if you do need that, I'm not sure you've got the right deal. Let's wait and see. All of this is on the table. What is wrong to do is to pick off individual stuff in a TV studio, yes or no on that. You've got to negotiate all of this behind closed doors. You've got lots of moving pieces on the table. That's how you conduct a really difficult negotiation. There's all sorts of other issues within it.
You've often accused Sir Keir Starmer of sitting on the fence for so long he gets splinters in his backside.
But we've just
You're
seen
doing the same thing now.
There are moments when actually things should be done behind closed doors, and this is one of them. And we saw the consequences on Friday if you don't do these most sensitive issues in that way.
OK, let's turn to my panel quickly. Again, we're still waiting for Donald Trump to emerge there and the White House to address the world on an investment issue. This could be Ukraine. It could be something altogether different. Let's bring in now Nigel Nelson. Nigel, a lot of people, I just want to repeat, the viewers are sending in their messages today. They want no part of British troops being deployed to Ukraine. A lot of them have long memories of Iraq, of the Falklands. Now, why should Britain lead the way in a war where we are nowhere near the military front line? Germany refused 2 weeks ago to deploy any of their own troops. They're on the front line. They're the biggest economy in Europe. Why aren't Germany leading the way? Why is it always Britain?
Well, Britain is leading the way because we've got the bridge with with America and with Donald Trump. That's the first thing.
Germany could have that.
The second thing is, whatever happens in Ukraine affects us. This is actually part of our defence. We may not be right up there at the border along with Estonia, Latvia or Lithuania, but whatever happens to Ukraine would ultimately affect us. So this is part of our defence. What we shouldn't do is bury our head in the sand and say we'll have no part of it. Now, whether or not you end up with troops on the ground, I think Richard again is right. This depends on how things work out. The important thing was to say we are willing to put troops on the ground. We don't know they'll be needed, but we are willing to do so if they are.
OK, we have to leave it there for the time being. Richard Tice, thank you very much for joining us. We're still waiting for Donald Trump to appear at the White House. It's his party. He'll be late if he wants to. This is is entirely normal. Gawain Taylor, Nigel Nelson, thank you very much, Richard Tice. Pleasure to have your company. Let's go to a break. We're back soon.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. I've got live pictures on your screen now of the White House, and we are expecting an imminent announcement any moment now from Donald Trump. Now, this may be on his comments earlier on. He was talking about this guy doesn't want peace, and we won't put up with it for much longer. He was, of course, speaking about Volodymyr Zelensky of that astonishing bust-up they had in the White House on Friday. They cannot do the job without the United States, Donald Trump said on Truth Social. And earlier on today, Zelensky had said on social media himself, an end to the war is still very, very far away. And Donald Trump seems to be not remotely happy with that. Well, as we wait for that press conference to kick off, let's get back to our panel now. Nigel Nelson and Gawain Taylor. I want to talk about NATO Jews, gentlemen. Sir Keir Starmer said today, Europe must do the heavy lifting. He said the heavy lifting. Now, Europe does not do the heavy lifting by any yardstick at present in terms of
done for 40 years.
In terms of funding, something like $949 billion from America and around about $450 billion from all of Europe combined. And only 8 nations pay their 2.5% dues. If you were Donald Trump right now, Gawain Taylor, and you can see Sir Keir Starmer saying Europe must do the heavy lifting, you probably go, great, so cough up. Over to you, lads. This could be a very, very expensive mistake for Europe and for Sir Keir Starmer.
It could be a very expensive mistake, or it could be, I mean, to a certain extent, Trump's already started something you'd be very happy with, which is the European leaders going, we are going to have to spend more on our defence, we're going to have to spend more on things of this sort. Has been one of Trump's... That's one of his aims, is to get us to spend more and to get us to involve more. So actually, Trump can see that as a win because he's forcing the hand of European leaders to actually dip into their own pockets. Now, whether we can afford it's a different question. But that is already, Trump can feel that he's winning because he's forcing the hand of Europe to do it. Now, does that mean he pulls out of those NATO commitments? I think that's highly unlikely. However, the fact that Europe is now realising it's going to have to pay more because of that concern, that's a good thing.
Nigel Nelson, a lot of people watching the show were saying the heavy lifting means the financial heavy lifting. That's what this comes down to.
Of course it does.
Who's going to pay?
Down to money.
Who's going to pay for all of this? How can we have the same government telling us endlessly, in a robotic, parrot-like manner, we have a £22 billion black hole, we have to make tough choices, including axing pensioners' fuel allowance, including going for a land grab on farmers, at the same time finding potentially hundreds of billions of dollars for NATO dues?
Well, that will depend on how much we have to spend. At the moment, the money is not coming from the British taxpayer, it's coming from the overseas aid budget.
Which is the British taxpayer?
Yeah. Well, the money is sitting there, the money is committed, so it's not as if people are being taxed more to pay for this.
But where's it come from? Not the magic money tree, it's British taxpayers.
But it is a budget that actually exists, and that budget is being cut now, so we can get back £13 billion from it, and that pays for defence to go up to 2.5%. Yes, it will cost more money if we go further than that. If we go up to 3%...
Which we have to.
Well, this is only what NATO wants us to do.
Absolutely.
And Donald Trump is talking about us spending 5%. We have to see where we go. As far as the heavy lifting in NATO goes, Europe's going to have to work out how to go and do it. But at the moment, when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, NATO borders with Russia were just 130 miles. Now they're 1,500 miles. One of the reasons why Putin is particularly worried and feels threatened by it. So we have got a lot of clout as it exists within Europe.
Have we got a lot of clout going in town? We're imminently waiting, I think, for Donald Trump to come out of that door. Have we got a lot of clout, or is Donald Trump watching all this? In fact, that door is swinging open now. Here comes the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Let's see what he's got to say. Let's go to the White House.
Thank you very much. This is a very big day for a lot of reasons, but this gentleman is a very unique man. It's, I think I could say in the world of chips, certainly, but in the world pretty much of business, nobody's done what he's done. For those of you that are into that world, you would say, wow, he's a legend, but he is a legend, and it's an honor to be with you. Very great honor. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Welcoming from TSMC, which is the biggest there is at a level that you can't even calculate, frankly. CC Wei to the White House for a very historic announcement. This is a tremendous thing for our country and hopefully for his company. We're also pleased to be joined by Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and White House AI and the crypto czar David Sachs, another two very highly respected people. It's great to have you guys involved. And David, thank you very much for coming on. David is sort of the king of intellect in that world. We have some good people. Today, Taiwan Semiconductor is announcing that they will be investing at least $100 billion in new capital in the United States over the next short period of time to build state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facilities. I think mostly it's going to be in Arizona, which is what I understand, which is a great state. I like it because I won it, but I won most of them, actually. But we won it, and we won it big. The most powerful AI chips in the world will be made right here in America. And it'll be a big percentage of the chips made by his company. But as you know, they're based mostly in Taiwan. And they're far and away the biggest. There's nobody even close. This $100 billion in new investment will go into building 5 cutting-edge fabrication facilities in the great state that we just discussed, Arizona, and will create thousands of jobs, many thousands of jobs, and they're high-paying jobs. In total, today's announcement brings Taiwan semiconductor investments to about $165 billion they've started already. Among the largest new foreign direct investments in the United States, Apple, as you know, made a big announcement last week of $500 billion, and we have some others that have announced. We have many that want to announce, but I don't have time to do all of these announcements, I tell you. But for you, I'm doing the announcement.
Thank you.
This will create hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity and boost America's dominance in artificial intelligence and beyond. Semiconductors are the backbone of the 21st century economy, and really, without the semiconductors, there is no economy, powering everything from AI to automobiles to advanced manufacturing. And we must be able to build the chips and semiconductors that we need right here in American factories with American skill and American labor. And that's exactly what we're doing. As you know, Taiwan pretty much has a monopoly on that market. And I think pretty much is not a term that's even appropriate. They do have a monopoly, and this is a tremendous move by the most powerful company in the world. It's a matter of economic security. It's also a matter of national security for us. And at the same time, Mr. Wei will be able to diversify and have his a tremendous presence in another place, and a very safe place. And I want to thank Taiwan Semiconductor for doing the announcement, and I'd like to ask Mr. Wei to say a few words, if you might, and I'd also like to ask Howard and David, you can say a couple of words, but maybe you should go first, because right now he's the most important man in the room. I'm sorry, fellas. Please. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great honor.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit nervous, so I have to pull out my piece of paper.
Okay, that was Donald Trump there, of course, the president of the USA, talking about a massive $100 billion inward investment in the United States as the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company. Of course, a huge strategic move here. For starters, it will make an enormous amount of money for taxpayers in America. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it will remove a Taiwanese company from Taiwan into America, which may, of course, get around any potential future political conflict with China in the area. Not quite the bells and whistles statement we're expecting, of course, on Volodymyr Zelensky and potentially pulling millions of dollars of aid from the area. But let's get off that now, get back into my studio. Did I say I'm joined now by Lord Glassman and Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, as well as my illustrious panel, Gawain Towler and Nigel Nelson. Lord Glassman, may I talk to you first? You were saying there, Donald Trump means it on trade. He really means it about America first.
He really does. I mean, this is the new era. We haven't fully adjusted. It's the end of globalisation. It's the end of all that progressive globalisation and the rule of lawyers. It's going to be the tariffs. It's going to be very strong state partnership with industry. Very strong nation-state commitment. I mean, it's a really new era that we're moving into, and we hear it every day. I just hope that everybody's listening and can adjust.
So, Jacob, what do you make of this? I mean, of course, the strategic interest of keeping China at arm's length is a huge statement of intent from Donald Trump, has been all the way through, and certainly in this presidency. This marks a huge moment, does it not, of making sure America is first and is in control of a vital industry for America's future?
It's really important. As an investor, before I went into politics, I often invested in TSMC. It is a world-beating company. It's incredibly good at what it does. Of course, it does a lot of it in mainland China, but making sure that its highest-end chips are being made in the United States is a protection for global technology. It's also quite an interesting statement about Trump's commitment to Taiwan, which has been debated. If he's doing deals with major Taiwanese companies, does that indicate he's actually more concerned about Taiwan than perhaps he is about Ukraine? Is there something going on there that is important?
Jacob, I think that's certainly the case. I mean, China is definitely... I mean, in the end, we're going to have the reckoning, Jacob, with Thatcherism. What did it all mean? It meant that all our industry, all our inherited wealth was invested to strengthen the Chinese Communist Party. It was that transfer of wealth. That's the terrible story we've got to recognise. That all of that period was a fantasy world that empowered Chinese communism. all that investment in their industry and the deindustrialisation that we lived through.
Not surprisingly, I wouldn't blame it on Thatcherism. I'd blame it on the mad green ideology. The terrible report that came out on the 7th budget from the Climate Change Committee pointed out that we had reduced our emissions in industry by, among other things, a 70% decline in our steel industry. That's where it's all gone off to China. It's to do with the green emissions.
Look at the
Margaret
levels
Thatcher
of
made steel more efficient.
No, look at the levels of investment in China that went on under Thatcher that were nothing to do with environmental considerations. It was because they had no free and democratic trade unions, they had no limits on production, 24-hour-a-day production, nets on the windows so that the workers couldn't commit suicide. Absolute exploitation. And that satisfied Thatcher because it was higher rates of return
But this didn't
at
really...
greater speed.
I mean, I don't think the timelines really work because most of the emergence of China came from 1990 onwards, at the point at which Margaret Thatcher had left office. Really importantly,
the really
China...
crucial meeting was between Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping in Peking.
Gentlemen, I'm going to bring my panel now. Jeremy Corbyn has been compared to Nigel Farage today. I wasn't expecting Margaret Thatcher to be blamed for the industrial success of China. We live and learn. Gentlemen, let's get the panel in now. Gawain Towler,
story.
On the end there. We expected fireworks about Ukraine in this press conference. Instead, this is about the buttressing of the American economy and America first. We expect to see a lot more of this, I think.
I think what Lord Glasson was saying is absolutely true. We're moving into a real world, not a world of fantasy and a world of virtue. We're moving into a real world, one in which power and money matter. And they always did.
Industry.
And industry. And they always did. It's just that we've been supping on a diet of virtue for decades now, and the realities are awful. It is utterly fake.
Real virtue, the ability to do things, that's vital.
And employ people and give them the lives that they deserve. That comes out of those things. I sort of think both of you are right on the souping up China. The fact that we've exported our entire car industry, and so is Europe now, because of the green thing. All the electric cars are being made, and all that being pushed out, apart from Tesla. So that is happening, as well as some of the investment stuff you're talking about.
If you look at the long story, I think it's a really important story for our nation. Abandoning industry was a disaster.
Well, did we abandon it, or did we completely, as Jacob said, offshore it through guilt, through net zero, through the fact we had to decarbonise? We sent it all to China. I want to bring Nigel Nelson in. And the net throughput of all of this is that we don't make anything anymore. We don't have any heavy industry anymore. It's the 40th anniversary today of the coal strike again. And we have no industry left. Donald Trump is back on stage. Let's see what he's going to say.
Now, a big percentage. Worldwide, we had very little, almost none. We used to have a lot with Intel, but we had very little. And we'll be at close to 40% of the market with this transaction and a couple of others that we're doing. That's a tremendous leap, like a leap that nobody would have really said was possible. So I just want to thank you all for being here. If you want a couple of questions, ideally on this subject, yes.
Please. Number of jobs that will be created. He said
you're probably talking about 25,000 jobs, but it'll get bigger and bigger with time. Knowing this gentleman, it'll get bigger and bigger. There'll be no stopping him. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
In addition to the job, you talked about national security, and that's one thing I think a lot of Americans don't understand. Explain the national security aspect of this.
Well, without the chips and semiconductors, nothing runs today. You can't buy a car without them. You can't get a radio, a television, you can't get anything. And we thought it was very important, obviously business-wise, but we thought even in terms of national security to have this large percentage of the chips, semiconductors, and other things that they make, the most important product, and not a product that you can really copy. It takes years and years. You know, on the needle of a pin is total genius. I mean, they can put things, something the size of the needle, the point of a pin, they put information that is just not even believable. So if you would see this, it's just really something. Yes, Brian?
One aspect of that, Honda announced they're coming to Indiana because of the tariffs. Once again,
That's right.
bringing additional jobs and manufacturing. You want to comment on that as well?
Well, Honda's coming, and I told you about Apple that they're going to be starting to build massively here, $500 billion. And we have many other companies going to be announced, but we had many that have already announced. And no, it's going to be great. It's looking really strong. I don't think this country has ever seen anything like we're seeing right now. Now, the tariffs, as you know, will start a week earlier than the reciprocal, which is going to be on a couple of weeks earlier. Reciprocal tariffs start on April 2nd. And I wanted to make it April 1st, but I didn't want to go April Fool's Day because that costs a lot of money, but that one day. But so we're going April 2nd. But very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico, and that'll start. So they're going to have a tariff. So what they have to do is build their car plants, frankly, and other things in the United States, in which case they have no tariffs. In other words, you build, and this is exactly what Mr. Wei is doing, by building here. Otherwise, they'll build, if they did them in Taiwan to send them here, they'll have 25% or 30% or 50% or whatever the number may be someday. It'll go only up. But by doing it here, he has no tariff, so he's way ahead of the game. And I would just say this to people in Canada or Mexico, if they're going to build car plants, the people that are doing them are much better off building here because we have the market. We're the market where they sell the most. And so I think it's going to be very exciting for the automobile companies, very exciting for, I can think of any, as an example, North Carolina, they had the great, I used to go there to buy furniture for hotels, and it's been wiped out. That business all went to other countries. And now it's all going to come back into North Carolina, the furniture manufacturing business, please.
Is the Ukraine minerals deal now dead, or can it be revived?
Well, I'll let you know. We're making a speech. You probably heard about it tomorrow night, so I'll let you know tomorrow night. But no, I don't think so. I think it's a great deal for us because, you know, Biden very, very foolishly, stupidly, frankly, gave $300 billion and $350 billion more accurately to a country to fight and to try and do things. And you know what happened? We get nothing. We get nothing. Just gave it. We could have rebuilt our entire U.S. Navy with $350 billion. Think of it, $350 billion. We could have rebuilt our U.S. Navy. So he gave it away as fast as the money could be gone. And what we're doing is getting that all back and a lot more than that. And we need, it's very important for this business that we're talking about here with chips and semiconductors and everything else, we need rare earths. And the deal we have is we have the finest rare earths that you can.
Sir, on Ukraine. Mr. President, what do you need to see from President Zelensky to restart these negotiations?
Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us because, as you know, that's right there. That's the border. This country really was like the fence on the border. It was very important to Europe, and I'm not knocking Europe. I'm saying that they were a lot smarter than Joe Biden because Joe Biden didn't have a clue. He just gave money hand over fist, and they should have been able to equalize with us. In other words, if we gave $1, they should have given. Well, we gave $350 billion. They probably gave $100, but on top of it all, they get their money back because they're doing it in the form of a loan, and it's a secured loan. So when I saw that, which I've known about for a little while, I said it's time for us to be smart. At the same time, it's great for them because they get us in the country taking the rare earth, which is going to fuel this big engine, and especially the engine that we've in a very short time created, and we get something, and we're there. We have a presence there. With all of that being said, I want one thing to happen. I want all of those young people to stop being killed. They're being killed by the thousands every single week. Last week, 2,700 were killed. 2,700 young, in this case, just about all young boys from Ukraine and from Russia. And that's not young people from the United States, but it's on a human basis. I want to see it stop. The money is one thing, but the death, and they're losing thousands of soldiers a week. And that's not including the people that get killed every time a town goes down or a missile goes into a town. And I want to see it stop. Yes.
Are you considering canceling military aid to Ukraine? And can we get a reaction to what the Kremlin just said, that your administration is bringing U.S. worldview in alignment with Moscow's?
So this is a deal that should have never happened. This is a deal that would have never happened. And it didn't happen for 4 years. It didn't happen. It was never even close to happening. If I were president, it would not have happened. And October 7th would not have happened in Israel. And inflation wouldn't have happened. And Afghanistan, disastrous, the way they withdrew. Not the fact that they withdrew, but the way they withdrew would have never happened. And we would have had Bagram right now instead of China having it. It was 1 hour away from where China makes their nuclear weapons. We would have kept Bagram, with one of the biggest air bases in the world. All of these things happened, and it's a shame. But it is what it is, and now we're here. I want to see it end fast. I don't want to see this go on for years and years. Now, President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
This project, could this minimize the impact of the U.S. with chips should China decide to isolate Taiwan or China decide to take Taiwan?
Well, it's a very interesting point. It's a great question, actually, but this would certainly, I can't say minimize. That would be a catastrophic event, obviously, but it will at least give us a position where we have, in this very, very important business, we would have a very big part of it in the United States. So it would have a big impact if something should happen with Taiwan.
Are you looking at relieving Russian sanctions if there is a peace deal?
Well, we're going to make deals with everybody to get this war, including Europe and European nations. And they've acted very well. You know, they're good people. I know most of them are friends of mine. The heads of state, the heads of the various countries, prime ministers from the different. I got four prime ministers and 5 presidents called me over the last 2 days, and they want to work it out. They want to get it worked out. And I think they're also, you know, they're talking money, but the money is less important than the deaths. We're talking thousands of young people a week. And people would say, why do I care about Ukraine, young people? Why do I care about, and not all young, but they're pretty young. You know, Ukraine is running a little bit low, and they're getting older. They're recruiting older people. It's a very, very sad thing that's happening over there, and we want to get it finished. We want to stop the death.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No
effect?
room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, you know, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Mr. President, just to follow up on my colleague's question.
And just so you understand, vast amounts of fentanyl have poured into our country from Mexico. And as you know, also from China, where it goes to Mexico and goes to Canada. And China also had an additional 10, so it's 10 plus 10. And it comes in from Canada and it comes in from Mexico. And that's a very important thing to say. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Have you decided if you're going to suspend military aid to Ukraine? Have you made that decision?
Well, I haven't even talked about that right now. I mean, right now, we'll see what happens. A lot of things are happening right now as we speak. I mean, literally as we speak. I could give you an answer and go back to my office, the beautiful Oval Office. I could go back into the Oval Office and find out that the answer is obsolete. It's like his business. It's obsolete. You come up with a new chip and it's obsolete about 2 minutes later, right? But that's what's good about his business. That's why he's the only one that's successful in it. But
to follow up my colleague's question, from Russia saying that your foreign policy is largely in line with their vision, should that be concerning to Americans?
Said what?
Should that be concerning to Americans?
Read the statement.
That Russia says that your administration's foreign policy is, quote, largely in line with their vision.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think it takes 2 to tango, and you're going to have to make a deal with Russia, and you're going to have to make a deal with Ukraine. You're going to have the assent, and you're going to have the consent from the European nations, because I think that's important, and from us. I think everybody has to get into a room, so to speak, and we have to make a deal. And the deal can be made very fast. It should not be that hard a deal to make. It could be made very fast. Now, maybe somebody doesn't want to make a deal, and if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long. That person will not be listened to very long. Because I believe that Russia wants to make a deal. I believe certainly the people of Ukraine want to make a deal. They've suffered more than anybody else. We talk about suffering. They've suffered. But if you think about it, under President Bush, they got Georgia, right? Russia got Georgia. Under President Obama, they got a nice big submarine base, a nice big chunk of land where they have their submarines. You know that, right? Crimea. Under President Trump, they got nothing. And under President Biden, they tried to get the whole thing. They tried to get the whole big Ukraine, the whole thing. If I didn't get in here, they would have gotten the whole thing. So I can only say you can go back to Bush, you can go back to Obama, and go back to Biden. They took a lot. The only one they didn't get, you know what I gave them? I gave them anti-tank missiles. That's what I gave them. I gave them sanctions on Russia. I gave them javelins. You know the javelins? You know when they took out all those tanks? You know the tanks were heading to Kiev by the hundreds, and they were unstoppable. And I gave them javelins. So, you know, I really, Putin is the one that will tell you this has not been so good for them. The fact is that I just want fairness. I want fairness. But think of it. I gave Russia nothing except grief. I gave them nothing. I gave them sanctions and javelins. That's what I gave them. Obama gave them sheets, and you heard that statement before. It's a very famous. Trump gave them javelins, and Obama gave them sheets, and then they say how close I am to Russia. And let me tell you, we have to make a deal because there are a lot of people being killed that shouldn't be killed. But remember, Trump gave them nothing, and the other presidents gave them a lot. They gave them everything.
On trade, you met with Argentine President Javier Milei at CPAC. He wants to sign a free trade agreement with the United States. Is that something that you would consider even with Argentina?
I'll consider anything. And Argentina, I think he's great, by the way. I think he's a great leader. He's doing a great job. He's doing a fantastic job. Brought it back from oblivion. Yeah, we'll look at things. We're looking at the UK with things. It doesn't have to be tariffs, but tariffs are easy. They're fast. They're efficient. And they bring fairness. For instance, when people kill their dollar, their equivalent of the dollar, whether it's the yuan or the yen in Japan or the yuan in China, when they drop them down, that puts us at a very unfair disadvantage. So all I have to do is say, Howard, we're going to have to raise the tariffs a little bit because I've called President Xi, I've called the leaders of Japan to say you can't continue to reduce and break down your currency. You can't do it because it's unfair to us. It's very hard for us to make tractors, Caterpillar, here when Japan, China, and other places are killing their currency, meaning driving it down. So all of these things add up. And the way you solve it very easily is with tariffs, because when they do that, instead of having to make phone calls every day like I used to do with certain leaders, President Xi a little bit, a lot of phone calls, talking about the fact that they're lowering their yuan, they're lowering it down, and that makes it very, very hard for us. So this way I just say, look, let them do that, and we make up for it with the tariffs. But
will you be speaking with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum about
yeah, sure, I will. I have a lot of respect for her.
Mr. President,
tariff takes effect. It'll be 20% on China now. How high are you willing to go against China?
Well, I can't say. It depends on what they do with their currency. It depends on what they do in terms of a retaliation with some kind of an economic retaliation, which I don't think they're going to retaliate too much. Hey, look, the United States has been taken advantage of for 40 years. The United States has been a laughingstock for years and years. That's why this gentleman is built in Taiwan instead of building here. It would have been better if he built here. If we had a president that knew what they were doing, and we had a lot of them very bad on trade. Look, I'm a huge fan of Ronald Reagan, but he was bad on trade, very bad on trade. He allowed a lot of people, a lot of businesses to be taken. So I say that with due respect because he was so great on other things, but he was bad on trade. We are setting records right now, records like nobody has ever seen before. When you have companies like this coming in, and almost 40% of their company in one signature is going to be devoted to what he does, which is one of the most important businesses in the world. That's an unbelievable thing. When Apple now is going to start building all of their plants here, all because of what we've done in terms of, it's not because he likes me or they like me. They don't probably like me at all. I don't know. I think he likes me a little bit at least. But you know what? It's the incentive we created, or the negative incentive. I mean, it's going to be very costly for people to take advantage of this country. They can't come in and steal our money and steal our jobs and take our factories and take our businesses and expect not to be punished. And they're being punished by tariffs. It's a very powerful weapon that politicians haven't used because they were either dishonest, stupid, or paid off in some other form. And now we're using them. Say it.
Have you spoken with President Xi about this?
I don't want to tell you that. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good evening. You are live with GB News. Donald Trump there, the US President, speaking live in the White House, covering, of course, major US investment with Taiwan and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, following, of course, intense political debate in recent days between the US President, European leaders and Volodymyr Zelensky. We will have plenty more news and analysis on what